Hi, this is Julie Robinson. I'm one of the ESC compliance supervisors with Pinellas County Schools. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the ROD process for the 2021 school year. In the next school year, we're going to be doing the request for high needs associates a little bit differently. In the past, you were used to filling out a form and sending it to Lynn Mowat. This year, we're going to be taking advantage of an app. For those of you that filled out the survey before spring break and indicated to us that you needed a new high needs associate for the 2021 school year, I will be sending this app and these forms to you for you to submit. Then moving forward, you all will have access to the app, and you will use the app to request any high needs associates moving forward. Now, as you know, high needs associates are year to year. They are not something that rolls over. So every year you must reapply for high needs associates to support the IEPs in your building. I want to talk a little bit before we get into the forms about what a high needs associate is and why they are needed and why sometimes they are not needed. All of you have received your allocations for this year, and I think some of you have received additional associates in some of your units. So I would ask that you take that into consideration when you're filling out the new app about whether you actually need more adult assistance in those classrooms. A high needs associate is typically only used for transitions. They are not to be used as reactive personnel for behavior. They are the most restrictive environment. If you have a one-on-one associate with a student, that is actually considered more restrictive than our center schools. Our center schools don't even have a lot of one-on-one associates. So what I will tell you is that research shows that when you have one adult and one child, that it actually causes the child to regress in the area of communication and regress in the area of independent functioning. So what we do is we try to look very carefully at those ratios because we are trying to encourage our students to communicate with peers and adults, to advocate for themselves, to communicate their wants and needs, to use communication systems, and all of those things actually are not compatible with a one-on-one associate. So when we are writing IEPs, we typically don't have a lot of discussion about ratios. We talk about during different blocks of the day, academics, specials, lunch, and transitions. What does that child need to be successful? Some of our students who are extremely high need, who have hand over hand, who need a high level of instruction because they're working on a communication system, a lot of those students really only need a 3-to-1 ratio. And here's the reason why. When you do an instruction piece, and you have a group of 3 students, you may read a story or provide a piece of information, and then you are going to be working individually with each one of those students. You are going to be moving from student to student to student to get a response and to teach that skill. You don't necessarily need one adult and one student to do that. We do have students who have very high needs. They don't attend for very long, but most students can attend very well in a 3-to-1 ratio. For transitions, you may have a student who's an eloper or is high need and needs a 2-to-1 ratio because most adults can handle 2 to 3 students in a transition. Some students who need a high level of ratio for academics, they may be able to handle 4 or 5 in a grouping during academics, but then need more support during transitions or may need more support as they move out into specials or lunches or if they're being included in some classes. So that's what I'm asking for as far as the zoning schedule that I'll get into is how many adults are in the room, how many children are in the room, and what is the exact role of each of those adults in those groupings. Because again, if you have too many adults in a classroom, you feel like it's helping you, but it's actually regressing those students. They are not growing in the way they need to grow in order to be more included in the future. So be very strategic and very careful. The reason we also talked to IEP teams about just putting what the child needs, like during transitions they need a high level of adult attention, or they need adult assistance in toileting, or doing that instead of putting exact ratios, is because as an administrator you have to cover those ratios. So if you have a student who has a 1-to-1 ratio or a 2-to-1 ratio, and you have a bunch of teachers and associates that are out sick and you are short on subs, you have to cover those ratios, because that IEP trumps everything else in your building, and those IEPs are legal binding contracts and they have to be fulfilled. So if it means that you or your assistant principal has to stand in that classroom all day to fill that ratio, that's what will have to happen, because the law doesn't care about people being out sick. It doesn't care about costs or anything else. What it cares about is that whatever's on the IEP is being followed every single day. So be very careful with your ESE teams about what they're writing in the IEPs, and make sure if they are writing ratios that there is data to support that that level of ratio is what that child needs for that particular time. So let's get into the form a little bit. This is what the ESE Associate Zone Schedule is going to look like. You're going to need to sit down with your ESE staff and fill this out before it's uploaded on the app. You're going to be putting the teacher name, the current number of associates that are in that class, along with the total number of students. Okay. Then you're going to be looking at the IEPs. How many students in that class require a 1-to-1 according to their IEP for academics, transitions, specials, and lunch, because that's going to be different for every single kid. How many of them really only require 2-to-1? How many require 3-to-1? How many require 4 to 6 to 1? And then you may have a lot of students in your classroom that don't have a ratio at all, because frankly, they've proven that they can be in a small group that's, clearly defined, but isn't put into a ratio on the IEP. So they may be able to be in a grouping of 5 or 6 for instruction, but during transitions they may need some adult assistance, but they haven't had a ratio defined on their IEP. So that's what I need to know here. Then you're going to break out every block of time, from leaving the bus or the car line to class, starting with reading group, then maybe doing math group, then they go to the playground. So I need the transition to playground, transition back from playground, what do they do next, transition to and from lunch, transition to and from specials. Whatever block of time is laid out on your schedule, that's what needs to be here. The location, again, the number of groupings. If you have a class that has 12 kids and you have 3 adults, how many groups are you creating? Each group, how many students are in that group and how many adults are in that group. Okay, this will help us look at your school as a whole and determine, do you have enough staff to cover all the IEPs in your building? Because you may have a class, an EBD class that doesn't have any ratios defined on the IEP, and if you have really strict ratios in another class, and then this class can, one of the associates from here can go over here to help out that teacher during certain times. You'll have to, as the administrator, work on a schedule for your associates so that all the ratios are covered. And then if you cannot cover those ratios with the staff you already have, that would be when you fill this out and send it to us to review. All right. The next form that you're going to be filling out is called a fading plan. Now the fading plan, we have had one in the district. We changed it a little bit so it was more specific. But again, associates are only assigned, high needs associates are only assigned year to year. So your team needs to be looking at throughout the year, how do we fade this person out? How do we get this child a greater level of independence? So you're going to be filling out this information here. You're going to be indicating, is it medical or is it behavioral? And again, medical doesn't automatically mean you need a high needs associate. That child may have nursing care. That child there may be other people in the building that can assist that child with toileting. There may be other people in the building that can assist that child in a wheelchair with transitions. So just because they have medical needs doesn't mean they need nursing care and a high needs associate. We have to look at who's in your building providing what services. Behavioral or functional, same thing. Has this child had a FBA in the last reevaluation cycle? Is the assessments on that FBA current? Are the observations current? Has the PBIP been addressed at every single IEP meeting and had adjustments made to it to provide supports? Has your team filled out a de-escalation crisis plan for this child so that all the adults in the building know what it looks like when this child starts to escalate and put certain things in place? Has the child's IEP been addressed? Has there been baseline assessments in every area? Do we know exactly what the child's struggling in? What time of day is the child struggling? Again, you're going to be filling out the ratios here. You're going to be describing the environmental engineering of the educational environment. What are you doing to make that classroom more independent for that child? Does the child have visual schedules? Have we taken clutter down off the walls? Have we created centers? Have we created a sensory space? What is it that you have done as a team to give that child a greater level of independence? And then what accommodations are you putting on the IEP? What does the child need structurally in their environment, or what does the child need as far as alterations to how they're being instructed so that they don't feel a need to elope or to throw themselves on the ground or to be violent towards peers and adults? We have to look at, again, a high needs associate is not a reactive person to be there if something happens. They are a person that is there to assist that child in gaining independence so that they can transition to the next level. What is that adult doing in the instructional pieces to provide that support? And again, that may not be a one-on-one. That may be a 2-to-1, a 3-to-1, or a 4-to-1 based on that child's needs. So you will be filling this piece out too. This form has to be reviewed 3 times a year because, again, at the end of the year, that associate is going to be fading, and we need to know that you have taken steps on the IEP, the PBIP, and any other guiding documents to make sure that that child is gaining a level of independence. If you get to that 3rd quarter review and you're still thinking that child needs a high needs associate, then that is going to trigger an IEP meeting to really look at what is going on with this child and do we have the right plan in place? Because again, high needs associates are for 1 year and they need to be faded by the end of the year. If you have any further questions about the fading plan or the ESE zone schedule, please work with your VE specialist or your SED or your ISD, because we have done several trainings on this, and they should be able to help walk you through the why. But if you have any other questions after that, you can reach out to myself, Julie Robinson, or Nicole Blair. We are the ESE compliance supervisors for the district, and we will help talk to you a little bit about the why. After you finish the app and you submit these, you will be getting a response back to whether a high needs associate allotment will be given or not, and if not, the reasons why. And then you can work with your team on the reasons why that allotment was not allocated. Because again, we don't have associates that we send to your school. We can only send you the allocation, and then it will be up to you to hire that person. So please remind your teachers and anybody else that is on the IEP team that it is not physical people that we send to your building. It is an allocation of funds, and it will be up to you to hire that position. And if you cannot hire that position, if it's on the IEP, then it has to be filled. And that means anybody in your building who is not currently doing something, and it may be a rotating group of people, subs, office staff, cafeteria staff, your assistant principal, but those ratios have to be covered even if you can't hire it. Again, the law does not care if you can't hire. They don't care how many people you have out sick. They only care about the ratio that's on the IEP. So be very careful with your IEP teams about putting these very restrictive ratios because they have to be covered. Make sure it is what the child needs and that those very restrictive ratios are being faded out, because again, the research shows that it does nothing but regress the communication, the independence, and the level of self-advocacy for these children. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out, and thank you for listening.